Hi friends, today we're going to talk about intellect versus gut. Which one is more important? I've been researching this online and there doesn't seem to be much in the sense of how it applies to being a musician. There's a lot of videos about this coming from the Indian side, like from India, how they talk about intellect versus gut or instinct. And there's a lot of talk in the West about intellect and, for example, what classical music does to your brain. There hasn't been a lot said about the connection for musicians. What's more important for a musician? The raw power of emotion or the calculated, methodical approach of intellect? So anyone that looks into this subject and takes a stance or a paradigm from India is going to tell you that, of course, these things are parallel. They go together. You can't have one without the other. But what does that entail for a musician? Well, the intellectual side is the side of learning about music, learning about your instrument. But you have to be careful because learning about your instrument can be really tied to emotion, ego, and fantasies you might have about what's going to happen in the future. And all these things affect how you approach the instrument. I'm telling you from experience, right? To be honest, I was quite recalcitrant when I was a kid. There were things that I just didn't want to face. There are things about hand technique that I didn't want to face. When I was studying with Richard Wilson, it was during a time where believe it or not, my father forced me into real estate sales. He had a company, selling real estate and apartments, and he forced me to go into that business because at the time he thought, oh, that's the future and whatever, right? So I did that for about 2 months and absolutely hated it. But in the meantime, I was studying with Richard, and I showed up to class one day, and I told him, oh man, I couldn't practice because I had to, work on this sale of an apartment. And he's like, what the hell are you doing? Do you want to be a drummer or you want to sell real estate? He couldn't believe it. He could not believe it. That kind of forced me into making a decision about what I was going to do in the next few months. And of course, you might say that intellectually, I could feel that money was in the real estate thing and drumming, which was going to be a much harder road, right? But my gut would not allow me to make this move. My gut was saying, you're a drummer, you're a drummer, you're a drummer, and that's the end of it, okay? So of course, I had to quit that whole real estate thing, and it felt like an elephant took his foot off my head. These two things are intertwined like many other things in drumming. Now, how do you actually get to the bread and butter here? You may or may not know that there's the technical side that you have to conquer, right? But there's also the emotional side of music that you have to investigate. When you're just running on emotion, on pure emotion, especially in drumming, you're like a loose cannon. You're just at the mercy of whatever emotions may come up for you at the moment. Whatever social situations may be influencing you. Whoever might be around you that might be controlling your emotions at any certain point.
We were just hanging out. I don't know. I can't remember. This is 20 plus years ago.
Oh my God, yeah.
Ooh. And then you were leaving. You're like, hey man, I gotta take off, man. And I was walking you out the door, and you were literally on my front doorstep saying goodbye. And you mentioned that you were starving and you had no food or no money. And I went, dude, I can make you a bologna sandwich, because that's all I had. You set this up by saying you had no work, you had no money. I was in the same boat, man.
Oh my
But I
God.
did have Oscar Mayer bologna in the refrigerator and a couple slices of white bread and some mustard or whatever. And it's a memory that is burned in my mind forever, because it was just so beautiful and honest and cool. And I'm so happy that, I could help. And even though it was just a bologna sandwich, but
It was,
that's,
yeah.
yeah. And you were like, yeah, man, that would be great. I said, come back in, come on, I'll make you a sandwich. And not knowing at the time that would be like the memory forever. But I love that. And I was glad that you came over.
The intellectual side of music, it's going to help you maneuver in these situations. Why? Because the intellectual side of music, it's something that expands your brain and that changes your paradigm on the very life that you exist in. The raw emotional side of drumming can't do that. When you start learning, for example, about rhythm, you realize the mathematics of it, you realize the infinite nature of the mathematics of it. Well, your mind is just blown, if you have the capacity to understand how complex and infinite and beautiful the whole thing is, your mind will be blown and you will be humbled, as opposed to the raw emotional side, where you might be humbled just because you make a mistake, right, in music, or something happens and somebody tears down your ego and tells you you suck or whatever, right? Without the intellectual side, somebody saying that you're a terrible drummer will make you want to quit. But if you are in control of your emotions, to whatever degree you want to say that they can be controlled, and you intellectually know that you are on a journey, you are on the path, and that this temporary setback is all part of the journey, then you won't want to quit. You'll want to continue, and you'll realize that this is all part of a process. Aside from that, the nitty-gritty is combining the intellect with the raw, and the raw is what I call gut. There's something called emanating time. I've made a video about this. Emanating time means that time comes from your gut. You see many great players doing this. All the greats, Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, everybody that has a deep sense of musicianship emanates the time. You don't play the time, you emanate it, man. You know what I mean? So that is absolutely gut feeling, gut and emotion and everything that encompasses the depth of being a musician. But without the intellectual side having prepared you to get to this state, you'll never be able to get to it. Now, this brings us also into the topic of being self-taught and being somebody that studied a lot with a lot of different people. There are certain things that you have to realize. Being self-taught is a myth. You are not self-taught. You are never self-taught. The only person who's self-taught is the first drummer ever in prehistoric times. Okay? When you refuse the help of people who have been there already, like I did, unfortunately, during a brief period in my youth, you just shoot yourself in the foot, right? You're part of a cultural rebellion that hurts you in the end in the world of drumming and the world of music, because this art form can't be learned by yourself at the depth that we're talking about. Here's an example. When I first started getting into Afro-Cuban music, I could play the patterns, no problem. Anybody can do that. Cascara, all right, whatever. That's what I call the tourist stuff. You take lessons with somebody who's in that music scene, and they'll show you the tourist stuff. This is clave, one e and the two e and a one e and the two e and, right? And this is cascara, and this is mambo, and this is Mozambique, right? The tourist stuff. But the vocabulary, man, inside that music is some of the deepest vocabulary that you're going to find in drumming, and that comes from the tradition, and it comes from Africa, and it has ties to religion and all kinds of crazy things that you're not going to understand without being under somebody's wing. I could not get it on my own. I tried transcribing the stuff. I tried listening to tons and tons of music. It's not going to work. The day that Luis Conte pulled me aside one day and said, listen, man, come over to my house. I want to show you something. Because we were playing together a couple of times, and he noticed in my playing what was going on, right? So I went to his house, and he showed me the 6/8 thing, the connection to 6 and 2. Ever since then, my mind was completely blown, right? I would have never discovered that on my own. So the raw passion of my youth had to be tempered with some intellectual knowledge, right, in order to grow. My next step in that whole journey was with Efren Toro, in phrasing and rhythm and all kinds of things like that. And then my next step with my gurus in India. Those were some of the deepest events in my life, right? To have someone who could just show me the right path. I was banging my head against the wall, and it actually hurt my career because sometimes I'd go to play salsa gigs, right? And I could do all the patterns, but my fills were wrong. They sounded like jazz, or they sounded like funk or fusion or whatever. So, you know, the guys in the band would look, I'd do a fill, and they're like, what? You know. And that hurt my career to a certain extent because people thought I was a jazz guy trying to play salsa, okay? So don't make that mistake. Don't think that you can learn everything by yourself because you can't, all right? There is no way on earth you're gonna go play tabla and learn conical on your own. That's a long apprenticeship where people go, you know, you go to your guru in India and you have to go live in his house, okay? You live in his house for the extended time that you're learning under him. It's a serious apprenticeship.
What you find in South India is you get a very idiomatic style of building like phrases and passages of rhythm called corvoys, which are, you know, long sort of themes that are developed through different ways, and you know, it's a really interesting form of rhythm. And if you don't know that type of music, then I would suggest you have a look at that because it's really interesting.
The two worlds are totally tied together. Intellect and gut. There's even this thing where they call the gut the second brain. In reality, this whole thing is technically known as ENS, enteric nervous system, right? It controls, it regulates sleep and all the autonomous parts of your body and stuff like that. It's the communication line between your brain and your body. Now, I think that has something to do with the gut feeling we experience when we play music. It's, of course, related to emotion, you know, the butterflies you feel in your stomach when something amazing happens, when you see a beautiful girl that actually likes you back. It's amazing, right? You get this feeling. So these things are really tied together, as you now can probably imagine. And it's all part of an experience when you play music. That's why we need to temper the raw emotional side, especially of drumming, with the intellect. That's why there are certain things we cannot learn on our own. Some things are just too deep to be deciphered without an apprenticeship model education.
I'd much rather see someone work on a tune just by listening and really kind of using his imagination. He might think of a different way of playing the same sort of thing that's unique to him.
You know, as you see, there's an inkling of drumming nerd in all of us, you know.
For sure.
It's a thing that's kind of natural, but have to balance it with the other stuff, man, because it's, you know, and take it from Joel, one of the most workingest cats on the planet right now. I mean, if I could only, make you guys see his schedule and what everything he's done. You know, go check out, everything he's done. It's an amazing career, and he's telling you what you need to know. Okay, I don't want to sound preachy again, because you may not know this, but I don't believe in the teacher-student model. I only think that we are human beings on the same journey. For example, in drumming, we're just on different parts of the path. I can relate to you what's coming up further along down the path, and we can share common stories about what might have happened to us on the road before. Got any crazy stories about gig stories? About blood, sweat, and tears?
Blood, sweat, and tears?
Crazy fans trying to get your autograph and stuff?
Well, you know, with blood, sweat, with blood, sweat, and tears, we were always surrounded with people, man. It was just crazy. I mean, you know, you go to the hotels, there'd be people in the hotels
waiting for you.
Yeah, you know,
wow.
But you know, it was the same. We had jazz situations with the same thing, but it was different for me because when I went in to play with jazz artists, you check in the hotel and you didn't see nobody until you went to the gig.
Right.
But there'd be people waiting for you for blood, sweat, and tears for autographs in the lobby. You know?
Those commonalities are very nice because they bind us in a brotherhood, brother, sisterhood, whatever if you're a girl watching this, type of experience, right? That's very important for the bonding in the learning experience. So, does raw emotion play a part in your intellectual journey? It certainly does, because you love drumming, you love music, you feel that you have been chosen to be a drummer. You don't choose drumming, it chooses you. Everybody who has the calling knows this to be true. And if you ever decide to quit drumming, it's the worst mistake that you could make in your life, because that will haunt you forever. I've seen guys that are multi-millionaires that quit drumming and they come to my gigs or they see me play somewhere and like they're almost in tears, you know, and they relate to me their story of how they became millionaires, but they quit drumming and now they regret it and they just, you know, it's one of the most horrible decisions they ever made in their life. The money cannot replace the drumming. I saw an interview with Warren Buffett as well. This is just a total side topic. They asked him, what would you do if you weren't an investor? And he said, I would be some kind of artist. That's very important. So remember, the gut and the brain are totally tied together. They need each other. You can't be just intellectual in your approach to the instrument. I've seen these types of guys, and I'm sure you have too. All the math and the whole thing where, oh, I'm going to play this math, drumming and stuff like that, it just leaves you cold. There are so many guys that can explain the math too, very intellectually precise and everything, but you put them sit down on the drums and it's so boring and not grooving and no soul. So that's an indicator that these things need to be tempered. They need to be together, okay? All right, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you on the next one. Peace from Hanoi, Vietnam.